Development done wrong can lead to unintended consequences, like what happened in West Louisville.
The main street there had once the barber shop, the grocery store, the salon, everything that you needed, the dry cleaner, whatever, for daily living. All that had been wiped out due to a lot of misinformed decisions.
And when you try to fix it, you might face a long list of other problems, like what happened with the suburban annexation in Indianapolis.
The first things that happened is their school closed, some of their businesses closed. They started getting new streets built that were to Carmel standards, not their historic standards. And they became very concerned about the future of their community and what they loved about it.
How can the community have a voice and benefit from a development it wants? A couple of Cincinnati urban planners came up with a very visual way to do it, a layman's field guide.
It's meant to be carried around, used, abused, dog-eared, written in, ripped apart. We even size it such that it can fit in your back pocket or your handbag.
The Neighborhood Playbook is almost 10 years old. What's its track record, and are the ideas behind it still relevant today? Stay tuned for a solutions sidebar, and my colleagues Herns Laguerre Jr. and Emiko Moore will join me at the end for some takeaways. Let's get into it. This is Brick by Brick, solutions for a thriving community.
Brick by Brick is made possible thanks to leading support from Greater Cincinnati Foundation, AES Foundation, and George and Margaret McLean Foundation, with additional major support from Lori Johnston, the Robert and Adele Schiff Family Foundation, Murray and Agnes Seasongood Good Government Foundation, and more. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Brick by Brick, where we're highlighting solutions for a thriving community in Southwest Ohio. I'm your host, Ann Thompson. Urban planner Joe Nickol has a story to tell in this solutions sidebar, and it revolves around his over-the-Rhine firm bringing communities to life. It uses incremental positive change and simplifies development for people who aren't architects or city planners. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
So you moved to Cincinnati in 2016. When and how did you notice that development was hard here?
What we were seeing in Cincinnati, and again mirrored our experience elsewhere, was that the process of change in neighborhoods was taking too long, that it was not reflective of the unique culture and identity of that place. Places were starting to all kind of look the same. And that the process of actually getting stuff built, in addition to taking too long, was really about how do we get something approved and built regardless of what the community has to say about it. It was development happening to a place and not with a place.
So thinking back to when you came here and you were noticing all this, and your partner, Kevin Wright, he did redevelopment in Walnut Hills, and you partnered with him to design the Neighborhood Playbook as part of the People's Liberty Project. So what is that, and how did it come to be?
Kevin and I had published an article, 5 Ways to Change Your Neighborhood This Weekend. And Eric had caught wind of that, and some of the other People's Liberty people thought, this could be for our second cohort, a great project to think about. And so we had a couple conversations, we applied for it, we got a grant to write the Neighborhood Playbook in 2016. And I don't know if you've ever written a book, it is very hard, as I found out. And for us, it was not just the easy part was what we were going to say. The hard part was how are we going to design it and articulate it in such a way that is accessible to non-professionals.
And this isn't a book that you would think of that you're opening up as 200 pages. This is, how would you describe it, like a pamphlet?
A field guide.
Okay, where it's opened out.
Yeah, and it's meant to be carried around, used, abused, dog-eared, written in, ripped apart. And we even sized it such that it can fit in your back pocket or your handbag. And so kind of the design and the experience of using it was a big thing. A lot of people recommended that we make it a digital thing. And we felt that it was important that you actually could hold on to it, rip it apart, take it out to the place you wanted to improve. And I'd say the last thing that drove the design is we wanted the 2 points of entry. One, to speak to developers who are entering a place. And then the other from the place's perspective, the community member's perspective.
So on one side it's for the developer, then you flip it over and it's for the resident.
Yeah, so it's a Z-fold, 2-sided book. And what's cool about it, and I think it still holds up, is that they are the same 5 plays but they're written very differently and for kind of different purposes. And the kind of aha moment and the reason it's so powerful and the way it's kind of guided our work to this day is that at the end of the read-through, you realize you're not on different teams from, say, a developer if you're a community member, but you actually have a lot of the shared objectives and you're on the same team. And that's really that kind of empathy building tool is what it ended up becoming.
So even though this has been out for nearly a decade or so, it's still relevant, it seems, and you still use the ideas. In terms of the Neighborhood Playbook, who has used it and how have they used it? Even
to this day, it's now in its second edition. It's in multiple languages. It's sold and still selling thousands of copies. And what it is a really great formula for, that neighborhood resident who's always complained about that lot down the street or their main street not being alive at night when they want to, go to a happy hour or dinner with their family. And it becomes a useful tool to start trying ideas and testing concepts. And then what usually happens is that becomes like the training grounds for then our organization to come in and support them on their next iteration of growth and change. I'm glad that you mentioned that it's still available because, of course, here at Brick by Brick, we're trying to look in and bring people solutions so they can possibly use something like this in their own neighborhood. So as a result of your partnership with Wright, you started Yard & Company, as you mentioned, and since then have done projects in more than 20 states. And you have an office in Oklahoma. Why do you think you've been so successful? I think, I mentioned how we got started. And I think we were tapping into something that a lot of people felt, but hadn't fully investigated or explored the options of alternatives the way things are typically done. And I think inadvertently, we tapped into a vein of thinking that was kind of hidden beneath the surface. And so very quickly out of the gates, we grew 20, 30, 40% year over year, just based on, I think, that kind of tapping into that undercurrent. But the big kind of hockey stick moment, the moment that cities and developers and institutions and companies started inquiring about our work and hiring us, change where they were actually using our words to make the pitch to us was the pandemic. The pandemic changed a lot of people's thinking around public space. It changed a lot of people's minds about what it means to, spend more time in my community rather than just a place to rest my head and go to work every day. They're starting to spend a lot more time walking around their neighborhood and living and working in the same place. And so people started thinking about place differently, but then they also started thinking about incrementalism differently, where all of a sudden we were all thrown into this world where we couldn't predict what next week was going to look like, let alone next year or 5, 10 years from now. And so people started to really embrace this idea, like we don't need to wait 10 years to do a big, massive project. Why don't we find out what we can do in the next 18 months or the next 12 months and really start to impact and change the trajectory of this place rather than just being kind of victims of whatever the market study says. We have agency in this. We can actually change that trajectory through the way we tell a story about a place, the way we activate it through events and art and experiences. Some of the things that were normally discarded as insignificant projects are now held up as a catalytic project. And I think that has had a huge impact to the type of work, not only that we're doing, but the way that the traditional industry has been addressing these projects.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but it makes a lot of sense. Well, even though you don't walk around with the Neighborhood Playbook in your hand, maybe, how do you approach design, planning, and consultancy when neighborhoods either ask you to come in or you identify something that could be built?
Yeah, so our whole mandate to ourselves is about bringing places to life. And so we come at it through the lens of the human experience. Because at the end of the day, we gauge our success, our impact based on are people coming to a place? Are they enjoying it? Are they investing in it? Are they choosing that place over another? And so our core ethos is about, okay, if we're inheriting this place that maybe is in some ways has an opportunity, how do we get people to care about it? How do we get people to spend their lives there? And so we start with a very discovery-driven process where we don't we do a little virtual stuff, particularly in our far-flung projects, but we're very much interested in getting out of the car, getting out of the plane, getting out onto the site and exploring it.
And you emphasize you don't start by showing the solution.
Absolutely not. No, the solution is there, but it has to start in a period of discovery, a period of exploration, and then the solutions start to present themselves. So we spend a lot of time exploring, a lot of time talking with people who know that place far better than we do. And then we come back, and at that point, we know a couple things, or we think we know a couple things that need to be tested. One is we think we know what the stakeholders generally need to be successful in this place, what they want to test from a development capacity standpoint. But we also know that there's a community, whether it's a greenfield farm or a 200-year-old neighborhood, there's a community of people who have woken up every day and looked at this piece of land or this neighborhood or that street or that piece of dirt, that parcel. And we have to construct a positive, forward-thinking conversation with them. And that is very case dependent. In some cases, it's as simple, if it's a big area, it's as simple as a survey and kind of getting the pulse of a community. But more often, what we're trying to do is have a lot of eyeballs seeing the same thing at the same time. And so a survey doesn't work. We actually have to go meet people where they are, introduce what it is we're hoping to do, and then experience that together on the site or as close to the site as possible. So a lot of our community engagement and testing of ideas isn't just, hey, what do you think of our pretty pictures? It's we actually stage set the vision on the site, see what works, see what doesn't, see who shows up, see who stayed home, course correct, but most importantly, if it's successful or some version of success, we use that as a springboard to take on the next more challenging thing.
It sounds like what you're doing here is you're having engagement, clear expectations, early conversations. You've mentioned in the past pop-up initiatives. So what is that?
So pop-up is anything that is kind of a low risk. If you fail, you're failing forward. You've learned something. It's anything that takes a minimal amount, relatively speaking, of resources, energy, materials, time, and says, okay, let's just test this out. So we do a lot of pop-up beer gardens, coffee shops, public plazas where music and public performances are taking place. Our own office on Pleasant Street has a pop-up storefront where we rotate concepts through to take advantage of the foot traffic on Pleasant Street. It's any of these kind of trial balloons that you design and put out there and see what the reaction is, and you learn something from it. And sometimes you discard it, and that's a great finding. And sometimes you build on it, and it grows into something you couldn't have expected.
Not every developer uses your method, and a lot of them have a fear of meeting with the community. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, and that is one thing I noticed in Cincinnati, maybe more so than some other communities, is a lot of development is done through lawyers. And I love lawyers. My brother's a lawyer. But that is a very difficult way to start a conversation about the future of a place that people really care about. And so we spend a lot of time in helping our developer clients think differently about time. Because I think most developers think that a community engagement process is going to be a never-ending doom loop of conversations. We have, half of our work roughly is with private sector developer type clients. And we have shown time and time again that actually it's much quicker to the end goal, to foster a very smart, targeted, clear conversation about a development proposal than just showing up with your model that you've used in 3 other communities, laying it on the table, maybe figuring out what paint colors to use the paint bucket tool on, and maybe where to put a few shrubs, and call it a day. Like that process is kind of dead on arrival now.
I hope you're enjoying our conversation with urban planner Joe Nickol, principal and co-founder Yard & Company. There's still more ahead following this short break. This is Brick by Brick.
Brick by Brick is made possible thanks to the generous support of so many, including Diane and Dave Moshe, P&G, the Camden Foundation, the Stephen H. Wilder Foundation, TJ and Susie Ackerman, Patty and Fred Heldman, a donation in memory of Frank and Margaret Linhart, and more. Thank you. We couldn't do this work without you.
A thriving community is not just a place, a stretch of sidewalk, or the buildings. It's also the people that call it home, that interact with it every day. That's us, you and I. Hi, I'm Mark Lammers, executive producer for Brick by Brick. Whether it's about housing, health, the environment, or a neighborhood need or innovation, we want to hear your thoughts. Your input helps guide the solutions journey that we're all on together, and the feedback is also important for Brick by Brick's sustainability. To give us your thoughts, just click the link in the podcast show notes or explore all of our solutions stories on the webpage and click the big green button to share the latest from your neighborhood. Building community around solutions. It's just another service and benefit of your local public media. Thank you.
Welcome back to Brick by Brick. I'm Ann Thompson. Let's get back into our conversation with Joe Nickol, and Emiko Hearns and I will be back at the end for some reflections. Let's drill down on some of your projects to find out what obstacles that you faced and how you worked through them or are working through them. Especially when creating housing, there can be some controversy.
Yeah.
Talk about projects in Louisville.
Yeah, so Louisville's a good example of a place that we've been working with the developer and the developer, and as an extension of the developer, the community that they're working in the city. We're working in West Louisville. If you know anything about Louisville, you know that there's kind of this historic line west of which was kind of the red line area, and areas that experience a lot of segregation, a lot of environmental injustices, particularly around industrial development. And our client competed for and won the rights to develop a former chemical plant site, which is a dubious award when it comes to how much cleanup you got to do to get that site development ready. But this is a developer that really embraced community as part of the solution, not community as an obstacle to the solution. And they worked much harder than the average company would to build trust, build relationships with the surrounding community, and really, in many cases, return agency to these neighbors to be at the table to help make critical decisions about the future of the site. And so a lot of that groundwork was put into place as we were being brought on board. And we helped craft a vision with that developer that would make sense to offset the costs of cleanup. So it's a very dense project. The first phase alone is about 300 units of housing. But we kind of have this really visceral reaction against calling housing housing. Because really what we need to do is be creating places in neighborhoods that have places to live. A lot of the dialogue locally, nationally about housing is like, how can we just crank out as many units as possible? And that is not the right mentality. We do have a big deficit, but we have to create more units, but we have to create more places, more importantly, that people actually want to live and spend multiple generations in. Anyway, bit of a sidetrack. So in Louisville, we've been working to establish that. They got public support to build that project. So the project's in the process of going through design refinements while they're doing the cleanup. And then the other really exciting thing is this is a place that's been malinvested in and overlooked for, generation or two. And so what we have to do is return the local economy. They had, the main street there had once the barber shop, the grocery store, the salon, everything that you needed, the dry cleaner, whatever, for daily living. All that had been wiped out due to a lot of misinformed decisions. So we had to return this local vibrancy, this local culture around a local economy to play in place there. So this is where pop-up is a bit of a relative term. So there we're engaging in a 3-year program to build a pop-up public square that will have all the elements of a community center in it. Places for young entrepreneurs from the neighborhood to establish their presence, cultural things like performances and music and art to take root, food, beverage. This is a food desert. So places where families can come together and experience their culture, but also experience and get food and other kind of critical needs. All of this is happening outside the construction fence. So that while all this energy is starting to return to this important corner of Louisville, the big project's coming in behind it. And what's the hardest part of any big project like that? It's filling the retail. And so this pop-up village, done correctly, will then start allowing successful enterprises that grew out of that space to then occupy more permanent space in the project behind it.
Another one of your big projects involves Carmel, Indiana. What happened there?
So Carmel, we've been working since 2019. We first did the comprehensive plan. Carmel's a very interesting place if you've been. It used to be a town of 20,000 people about 30 years ago, mostly an agrarian kind of northern suburb of Indianapolis. And over the course of 30 or so years is now a city of 120,000 people. Has exploded, has about 130 world headquarters of companies. I mean, there's a whole Carmel story that predates us. But we were hired to bring Carmel into the next kind of generation of comprehensive planning. Did that. That took a couple years of thinking and have since started drilling down into important neighborhoods within the city. And we were engaged a couple years ago to work on, in some ways, it's the newest Carmel neighborhood, but in other ways, it's actually older than Carmel itself. It was annexed in this area called Home Place. And it was the last bit of unincorporated land between Carmel and the border of Indianapolis. The contention and the history of that annexation was just toxic. I mean, people did not want to become part of Carmel. Carmel was hell-bent on making this part of the community for a lot of good reasons and maybe reasons that the local community didn't trust. But it is what it is. It happened. It got annexed in 2018. And then the first things that happened is their school closed. Some of their businesses closed. They started getting new streets built that were to Carmel standards, not their historic standards. And they became very concerned about the future of their community and what they loved about it. And so what we were hired to do is create a new vision for Home Place that better and more sensitively incorporated it into the future of Carmel, so that understanding it didn't have to look like every other corner of Carmel to be a successful Carmel neighborhood. In fact, if it was different, that would be a bit of a superpower, both for Carmel and for the local residents. We got into the project and realized that a lot of the social and community infrastructure had evaporated, and people had gone through so much kind of trauma of annexation they didn't trust even having a conversation or coming out of their doors. And in fact, many of our team were met with hostility when trying to have just basic conversations. So we backed way up. And so we got to start with crawling here, not walking and certainly not running. And just to shorten the story a little bit, we hired a local group of ambassadors that had been in the neighborhood, that are trusted faces, to be the face of the project. We became much more invisible. That was one. Two is there are 80 businesses there. None of the businesses had really been talking to each other, and they certainly had no level of organization. So we created a new business association. So going back to your question about community councils, we created a level of social and community organizing that could then be responsive to the community, responsive to the business needs, but also could advocate to the city hall. And then we created a new brand for that business district that was kind of born out of the stories that we were learning about in our engagement. And then finally, we created a new plan for that. The plan was really the least important thing, or at least, certainly not the first thing to go in.
So moving from housing to Cafe Elliott in Dayton, Kentucky, and then also advice for residents if they want a cafe or if they want anything in their neighborhood, like how do they go about it?
Yeah, so Elliott's a great example of, and a really great way of tying a lot of these themes that we've been talking about today together. So backing up just a little context. So Dayton, Kentucky, one of the river communities in northern Kentucky facing the Cincinnati over the river. It's in Campbell County. So if you're looking at Cincinnati, it's all the way to the right. And in the pandemic, we shut down our Cincinnati office for obvious reasons. And for whatever reason, we decided that we were tired of working in our attics and basements. And so we bought an old gas station. And we had big roll doors, so we could do all the things that we're all used to now and trying to make it as safe and comfortable as possible. And it became our workshop, our in many ways our office. But we embodied kind of our own philosophy and medicine to how we took on this project. So the first thing that we did is we gussied up the building, but just not like a big architecture project or engineering project. We built some planters with the community, and we repainted the street with a street mural with the community. That was our introduction. Hey, we're new to the block. Let's just do this together and see what results from it. We then started having community events on the apron where you used to fill up your gas in your car. This is an old gas station, so it was all very intimate, not like a new Buc-ee's or anything like that. Very small, early 20th century gas station. And then as the pandemic started to thaw, we started becoming a lot more structured and intentional. So we started a comedy club there. And 60, 70, 80 people started showing up on a regular basis, packed into the garage bays to watch 5 acts perform. Wow. And it started getting people, SNL writers and other people. Like, it was kind of this underground scene. That idea was cool, but we quickly realized we didn't have enough space to service it. So that idea spun out and actually took over an old church next door. And then we kind of born out of an earlier pandemic idea where we did drive-through coffee with a local coffee shop there. We were approached by an entrepreneur who had worked at a coffee shop but had never run a coffee shop to build out Elliott. And so at that time, we were moving back into Cincinnati. The space was going to become empty. It was a great timing to bring Elijah on board, the owner of Elliott. And he embodied kind of our spirit of, community-facing, community integration, and did a few pop-up events and started learning about the community. He moved his family there, and has done a great job with his family reimagining the space in his own image of what that space should be, and is now an amazing corner of Dayton.
Well, based on that, it shows that anything is possible.
It can be. It's worth trying. And so we always like to say that, you can spend all day dreaming, all day drawing, but, at the end of the day, you should go out and try to build something and see what the reaction is. You'd be always surprised. We're always surprised that, like, even the small act of building a bench or painting something or putting, lighting up has such a huge impact physically to a place. And then when you start inviting people in and they're kind of experiencing it in a new way that they never quite imagined, it's only like 25% of people understand a drawing, but everybody understands whether they like a place or not. And so you just gotta feel it, you gotta experience it.
Co-founder of Yard & Company, Joe Nickol. Thanks for being on Brick by Brick.
Hey, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Remember, if you're interested in digging deeper into our conversation with Joe Nickol and the Resident First philosophy Yard & Company employs, or want to learn more about Brick by Brick in general, there are plenty of web articles and videos. Go to cetconnect.org and thinktv.org. And we'd like to hear from you. Click on one of the big green buttons to share your feedback. Well, we've had time to digest this interview, and it's time for takeaways. And we welcome to the microphone Emiko Moore.
Hello, Ann and Hearns.
And Hearns Laguerre Jr.
Hey, everyone.
Hearns, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really liked your interview with Joe Nickol, and I think it was really great that he laid out a game plan, so to speak. I think that will help communities who are trying to figure this out, a structure to follow. But then the part I really liked was his emphasis on community. He said that the focus to just crank out as many houses as possible kind of misses the point in a sense. And he said we should focus more on building community. And that made me think of our own tagline to our show, Brick by Brick, Solutions for a Thriving Community. We didn't our tagline wasn't to build more houses or to build more hospitals, so on and so forth. I think we emphasize that community piece because there are multiple things that people desire desire to have in their neighborhoods. And I'll end with this Forbes article that was titled "How to Build Community and Why It Matters So Much." And this quote stood out to me for obvious reasons. It said, "People don't just want to lay bricks. They want to build a cathedral." So they want to have multiple elements, not just, great housing, but great resources, great medical resources, great education centers, schools, so on and so forth. Many things that they desire in order to build their own thriving community.
And there's a number of ways that people can go about that, the citizens and developers. Emiko?
Yes, it's interesting that the Neighborhood Playbook is for both the developers and for the community. It really sounded inviting and engaging, and bringing both sides together. I think it's so smart that this field guide focuses on finding shared goals for each unique neighborhood. I also found that the trial pop-up initiatives are a great idea. The community can test out like a beer garden or a coffee shop, to see if they like it or not. It's kind of like when you get to test drive a car to see if it feels right. So it's the same thing for neighborhoods. You want to kind of see if it really fits in.
And I wanted to give you some updates to some examples that Nickol talked about. Funding has been secured for Phase 1 development in West Louisville, and construction could start before the end of the year on the site of the old chemical plant. And then in Carmel, Indiana, the neighborhood now has a plan to move forward, which is being approved by the Planning Commission. Helping move that along was a group of ambassadors from the neighborhood, which Yard and Company hired. And, we would encourage you to picture your ideas in the neighborhood in which you live, with or without the Neighborhood Playbook. It could just be a piece of paper where you jot down ideas as you walk around the block. I mean, after all, as we've mentioned, people want to be a part of the developments that happen around them. Thanks for your thoughts, guys.
No problem.
Thank you.
Coming up on the next Brick by Brick, 2 sides, 1 goal. Build more affordable housing in Ohio.
Really, it's looking at asking the question, what would it make it easier to build housing units in our community?
So we have to continue moving forward with legislation like the one that we pass here in the budget, and can move in as other states work in this space.
Representatives Dunny Isaacson, a Democrat, and Adam Matthews, a Republican, in a roundtable discussion. How working together may help solve the housing crisis on the next Brick by Brick. That's our show. If you like what you hear, please rate and review our podcast. It helps make it easier to find. We hope you learned something, and if you did, please share it with your friends and family. For Emiko Moore and Hearns Laguerre Jr., I'm Ann Thompson. We'll be back soon with more solutions. Take care. Our show is produced, hosted, and edited by me, Ann Thompson, with reporting and story editing from Hearns Laguerre Jr. and Emiko Moore. Our executive producer is Mark Lammers. Audio sweetening provided by Mike Schwartz. Zach Kramer runs the lights and cameras. Derek Smith is our production specialist, and Jason Garrison is our production manager. Kelly May heads up our marketing and promotions, along with Mike Shea and Bridget Dillenberger. Alyssa Stephenson handles the website, and Steve Wright and Josh Lusby are our designers. Bill Dean and Andreas Kruja are the engineers for the show, and our chief content officer is Colin Shinamblo. Our music is from Universal Production Music. Brick by Brick, Solutions for a Thriving Community is a production of CET and Think TV, Southwest Ohio PBS member stations.